We all know that Joe Biden has a long history of saying controversial things, making gaffes, and on certain issues, he's got a troubling history. And so we knew that as we got into this potential run again in a Democratic primary, some of these things would be popping up. And this week we've got a big one. And this comes from Biden's interview by the People paper back in 1975. He was talking about racial integration via busing, which was at the time a controversial issue. And his position on it was passionate. So we've got a few quotes from him. Here's what he said. I do not buy the concept popular in the 60s, which said, we have suppressed the black man for 300 years and the white man is now far ahead in the race for everything our society offers. In order to even the score, we must now give the black man a head start or even hold the white man back to even the race. I don't buy that.
Let me be clear about a couple of things. On the one hand, this quote was from a long time ago and I think that's super relevant. But on the other hand, I want you to know, at the time, he was a United States Senator. So he was the 6th youngest senator ever elected, and that was in '72. So he's 3 years into his term here when he's making these comments.
Yeah, he's not 15 or anything.
Yeah, that's right. And the comments are bad. Trying to segregate Black Americans into the rest of the country at that point was not trying to hold the white man down. I mean, that is definitely cringeworthy. And if somebody said that today, they'd be done.
They'd be in the Republican Party.
They'd vote president on the anti-hate bill.
Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that people can't change, okay?
Yeah, of course.
So we're gonna have two different discussions here. How bad are these comments? And then is that still Biden today? But the comments so far are really bad.
Yeah, well, it gets worse. So he says, we've lost our bearings since the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case. To desegregate is different than to integrate. I am philosophically opposed to quota systems. They ensure mediocrity. This is probably the worst part though. The new integration plans being offered are really just quota systems to assure a certain number of blacks, Chicanos, or whatever in each school. That to me is the most racist concept you can come up with. I mean, I can come up with some more.
Yeah,
some more racist stuff, but it goes
later
on to say,
Donald Trump would say, hold my beer.
Yeah, what it says is, in order for your child with curly black hair, brown eyes, and dark skin to be able to learn anything, he needs to sit next to my blonde-haired, blue-eyed son. That's racist. Who the hell do we think we are that the only way a black man or woman can learn is if they rub shoulders with my white child?
Can I skip ahead to the first part of the conversation about how bad these are? They're terrible. They're very bad, extremely bad.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
And later he went on to say that you're going to stunt their children's intellectual, now referring to white kids, their children's intellectual growth by busing them to an inferior school. So which one was it, Joe? Is it that, hey, suggesting that black kids need to go into white schools is racist because it's saying that they have to be next to white people in order to learn, or is sending your kids to black schools like totally unacceptable because those schools are clearly inferior?
Yeah.
See, you see the problem there in the dichotomy? No, the reason why they had the busing, the reason why they wanted to integrate was because it wasn't that schools that black kids go to are by definition inferior and the ones that white kids go to are by definition superior. No, it's because they had given funding to the white schools and they were really good, and they'd given no funding to the schools that had Black and Latino kids in them, and that's why they were miserable. So that's why Biden and the other white people did not want to send their kids to the school that they had defunded, right? And they didn't want to give more funding to that school. They wanted to keep it for their kids. And then the very idea, not only the white kids going to the black schools, that was a non-starter. And if you want to be quote unquote fair to them, okay, back then people were on fire on this issue. And I don't know if people were more racist in '75 or they're more racist in the Trump era, but back then the idea of sending your kids to a black school, even for so-called liberals, was like, hey, look, I want integration. This is basically all of what Biden's quotes are going towards. I'm a liberal, I want integration, but not with my kids, right? I'm not sending them to a black school. Those are terribly inferior, and I'm not gonna fix them either, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But you sending black kids to my school? Nah, even that's a bridge too far. I don't want it. So these comments are bad, real bad.
So let me add a little bit of context before we launch into the discussion. The spokesman for Biden said, Joe Biden is today and has been for more than 40 years in public life one of the strongest and most powerful voices for civil rights in America. His long commitment to civil rights has repeatedly been recognized by many of the most important civil rights organizations in America. And to that end, some leaders of civil rights organizations have said that they consider him to be an ally. So with all of that, What do you think?
But Bill Russo also said that Joe Biden still does not believe in busing.
Yeah, that's true.
So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a last piece of context, and then we'll judge. Okay.
I mean,
Can we bring back the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So look, of all the different things that were done to integrate, busing was probably among the top of most controversial. Now, it doesn't mean that it was the most wrong. It was the most controversial because people get really touchy about their kids. Understandable, that part's understandable, but why, right? In this particular case, they're like, as I just told you, you're gonna bus my kids to a crappy inner city school. Yeah, but then let's lift it up. Like, let's make those schools better. And if they were integrated, all the schools would be better. And now Russo turns around and says, again, Biden's spokesperson says, you see that? Joe Biden said that the busing wouldn't help fix the problem of lifting up minorities in this country, and it hasn't been fixed, so he was right. No, he was not right. No, because we never bothered to fix and fund those schools in other areas.
Yeah.
And can I just briefly mention that we talked about a study, I think last year, showing that desegregation effectively, not by law, but in practice, is actually on the rise in a number of different areas of America now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last piece of context is, could Joe Biden have been reelected?
Sorry, segregation is on the rise in a lot of areas of the country.
Yeah. Could Joe Biden have been reelected back then? So his election would have been in 78, and when he made these comments in 75, he was halfway through his term. If he was in favor of busing, there's a good argument to be made that he would not have been reelected, even in Delaware. So keep that in mind for whatever it's worth. Now let's move on to how bad is it today? And how much has Joe Biden changed?
I have to add one more thing before we get to that discussion. It's quick. Look, one of the biggest issues facing public schooling throughout the country is the way that these schools are funded. So I know that the LAUSD has tried to mitigate this issue and not rely as heavily or solely on property taxes, but in the majority of districts throughout the country, property taxes are used to fund the school. So if you live in a wealthy area, obviously the property taxes are gonna be much higher, which means that you have more resources for the schools in that neighborhood. If you're living in a poor neighborhood, if you're coming from a lower socioeconomic status, and unfortunately, most of the time, these are minority individuals, you don't have as much funding for your schools because you live in a poor neighborhood with less in property taxes. So we never have a discussion about that, right? We never have a discussion about fixing that problem. It is a systemic problem that we just continue with because I don't know why. I don't know why it doesn't get addressed.
No, I know why, because I've talked to people who are good on other issues. You get to the funding of the schools and they're like, not with my kids, no way, no way. I'm gonna give maximum amount of money for my kid's school, and if the other schools don't have enough, that's their problem. It's not my problem. I don't live there. I live here.
Yeah, but you don't live on an island. You don't live on an island. For all the people out there who think of everything in this individualistic way, you don't live on an island. You will suffer the ramifications of your own ridiculous ideology and mentality. If you only think about it as it's me, mine, my kids. Well, okay, I'll give you an example of what I experienced today. The homelessness issue is so bad, right? So bad because the housing crisis is so overwhelming in areas of Los Angeles that there are homeless people. I live in a good area, right? But there are homeless people living in tents on the sidewalk in a so-called nice part of LA. This morning, walked to the side of my building and homeless people are defecating on the side of the building because they have no place to go. So if I'm selfish and I want to say me, and I'm gonna live in my nice neighborhood, your nice neighborhood means nothing if there's a huge population of Americans suffering, living on the streets, and they have nowhere to go. Like, you're not gonna enjoy your life if you continue on with that mentality.
And so conservatives talk about limousine liberals, and 98% of the time it's total horse crap. It's people with money actually doing good in the world, and they're trying to shame them from doing good, which makes no sense. But in this one case, there is a little bit of an argument to be made. So I'm not letting the conservatives off the hook, they're even worse on this. But we have done segregation on almost a deeper level now. And we made it more sophisticated, and a lot of liberals went along with it. And how do we do that? We said, okay, we're gonna have private schools and charter schools, And all the wealthy folks, including the rich liberals, took all their kids out of the public schools and put them into private schools, and then drained all the resources out of the public schools. Now the public schools in places like LA and New York are a disaster. Why? Because the rich kids aren't there anymore, so we left them to die, right? So now we got resegregation, to John's earlier point. It's a disaster and nobody's doing a damn thing about it.
Let me ask you a question, so sort of to launch us into a how significant is this? A little hypothetical for you. What would the reaction be like if Bernie had said all of these exact things?
Great point.
That is a great point. I would be outraged, just as outraged as I am right now.
Oh, I know, but obviously you'd be consistent, but I'm saying, what would the reaction be like?
So John, I don't know why I didn't think of that, but that's such a wonderful point. Right now, they'd be declaring his candidacy over. Everybody on cable news, this would be the top story, it'd swamp anything else, and they'd all be saying, Bernie Sanders is obviously racist, and what a terrible person, and we knew it, and he's got to get out of the race. He's got to get out of the race. Now, you want me to show you what Bernie Sanders was doing? Not even at that time, but even earlier. So this is important context. While Biden is saying, no, not with my kids, and I don't want them next to black kids, Bernie Sanders in 1963, so 12 years earlier than Biden's comments earlier, right? When there was even worse racism, worse segregation, was doing this. Let me show you graphics 27 first. So that's him getting arrested for protesting, wanna know what? Segregation. He demanded that the University of Chicago integrate the buildings that they own. They did projects to trick the university into discriminating against black people, because they were, and they proved it by sending in a couple first. They'd get rejected, then they'd send in a white couple. Bernie Sanders helped organize that back when he was a student, and then went to the university and said, you're busted, we knew you were racist. And then he did sit-ins to make sure that they would segregate their buildings, and then he chained himself to 2 African-American women to make sure that the kids in the schools would be treated equally, because they were giving, in Chicago, they were having the kids, black kids, go into little trailers that had no air conditioning and no heat in the middle of the Chicago winter, and had rats in it. Meanwhile, there was 380 empty white classrooms in Chicago. That's when he chained himself and said, no, you gotta give equal funding to African Americans in Chicago. Does he get any credit for that? Almost none in the media. Instead, they pervert it like he has the race problem. 12 years later, Biden is going around saying, I don't want my white kids next to black kids. And it's a story, it's not a massive story. Okay, so that's important context. Now, but we are not going to make the same mistake as the mainstream media. We're gonna be fair. Look, do I think Bernie Sanders' policies today are better than Joe Biden's? Yes, okay. Does that mean I'm gonna judge Biden unfairly? No. And so I am mixed on this story. That is, Jesus Christ, that's over 40 years ago, right? And about 44 years ago, that's a long time. And Biden has done a lot of great things for civil rights since then. So if you think this is the only thing Biden stands for, that is not fair, okay? And can people change? I mean, we've gone over this 1,000 times on the Young Turks. Of course they can. Has he shown that he's changed in a lot of ways? Yes. His spokesperson coming out today and saying he's still against busing. Whoa, I didn't see that coming. That is not, one, it's not politically smart, but more importantly, two, if he still believes that, and he still thinks that integrating is like quotas, then I'd go back to, wait, then he didn't change, and then that's terrible, right? The correct way to have reacted to this, and I would hope that he would mean it, is that he should come out and go, let me explain why I was wrong back then. And go through why I thought what I did, why it's the parts that I think are wrong, and if he thinks some parts are right, then he should defend them, and what my current day positions are, and then talk about his history in helping civil rights along in the Senate. That would be the right way to handle it. So far, just saying, oh yeah, we were right about busing. I'm surprised at how poorly that Biden is handling this.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this a game ender? Is it that strong? I mean, it's a terrible thing, but it is 44 years ago.
Yeah, it is 44 years ago. That's a long time. I agree. The next time he's interviewed, and look, if he launches his campaign this weekend, he's going to have a big sit-down interview. He's going to have a CNN town hall 10 minutes later. This has to be asked. I'm sure that it will be asked at the first debates in June and July. It will be asked, and we'll have to evaluate what he says about that time and what he thinks now, what policies he's putting forward. And look, because he's talking there, primarily he's discriminating against African Americans, hypothetically. That's the community that's going to decide. It's not on me to decide whether it's been long enough or anything like that. But it's our job in the media to make sure that people know important things about these candidates. And in a time when all these questions are being asked of Bernie Sanders about reparations and things like that, he's not the only person that has a position on that or related issues.
I mean, we all agree that what the mainstream media is doing in painting Bernie Sanders as having a racial problem. First of all, that's not even true. I mean, it drives me crazy. Like, oh, did you know he lost South Carolina overwhelmingly? Yeah. Did you know that 76% of Americans had no idea who Bernie Sanders was in 2015 when he began to run for president? He had no name recognition. If you don't give that context, come on. And the Clinton family with a positive image in the African American community that's an enormous factor in South Carolina. You leave all that stuff out, you're purposely smearing Bernie Sanders. Well, if you smear him and you glide past this for Biden, you betray your bias. But again, we also have to make sure that we're being straight up here, right? And so because we like his Sanders policies better, doesn't mean we should be unfair to Biden. So, okay, last thing. Anna, what do you think? How bad is it?
I think it's pretty bad. And while his views might have somewhat changed, I mean, he still disagrees with the busing policy. So I'm not like, maybe his rhetoric has changed, but his policy idea hasn't really, or his policy position hasn't really changed. I think what's far more important is to look at his record. And he's been in power in one way or the other, either in Congress or in the executive branch, and has had the ability to influence racial tensions here in the US. And so what has he really done? I mean, he's referred to as an ally, but what has he really done? Police shootings involving unarmed black men blew up in the news during the Obama administration. Did the Obama administration do enough to address that? And I love the point that you made, John. It's not really up to us to forgive him or not. I think it's up to the black community to take a look at his record, take a look at what he said in the past, and make a decision for themselves. It's not on us to forgive him. But I'm definitely more critical than you guys are. I'm just keeping it real.
Yeah, and of course the Latino community too. And finally, look, the one thing we all agree on is Biden's got to come out and answer this at some point. And so that'll help you decide whether you think he's passed it or not, because those comments are clearly very, very problematic. So he can come out and say it was 44 years ago, here's my real opinion, but he's got to do that. He doesn't just get a pass from anybody if he doesn't address the issue.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.